This is Musical Talk.
Musical Talk.
The UK's independent musical theatre podcast.
Musical Talk, the UK independent musical theatre podcast.
Welcome to this week's episode of Musical Talk. I am Nick Hudson, joined here as always by the lovely Antonia. Hello, lovely Antonia.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm good, thank
Great.
you.
You just got a new phone, haven't you?
Yes, did.
Very exciting.
In rose gold.
You are very rosy today. You are wearing rose perfume.
Yeah.
You are got a rosy top on.
It's got embroidered roses on it.
Yes. You've got a rose gold iPhone. We're going to be discussing that little film that came out recently.
If you haven't heard.
Beauty and the Beast. I'm not going to use the term remake, I don't think. It's a reimagining, I would say. And Michael Gordon Shapiro and I had a chat about it recently. He saw it. Antonia, you've seen it. Mm-hmm. You came out reeling, didn't you?
I've been reeling for the past 3 days.
Yes, I've noticed.
I saw it on Monday. I've been in a really good mood since I've seen this film. Yeah, I really enjoyed it.
Now, you heard Michael's discussion on it first, didn't you?
The perks of being a musical talk presenter, indeed. Yeah, I heard the conversation. Everyone's obviously entitled to their own opinion. I love the film.
But Michael, you're wrong.
No, I don't think Michael's wrong. I've taught this to Michael. You kind of came out of it like, yeah, it's a nice film. I came out of it like, oh my God. And Michael came out of it kind of like, that was a disappointment.
No, you came out with it, I cried through 90% of it, I believe, was your review quote to put on the poster.
Yeah, but I did...
For the right reasons as well.
Yeah, but I did say this to Michael. I said to Michael, that's not a measure of how good this film is because I cry at everything. So, I don't think people should go to the film expecting to cry all the way through. For people my age that were children when the first film out, this film is massively nostalgic. And it was that nostalgic element of, oh my God, this is amazing, that made me cry for 90% of the film.
Should we play the discussion I had with Michael, then you and I can bounce off it and see what we think. So here's the chat I had with Michael.
This is Alan Menken, and you are listening to Musical Talk.
Joining me from over the seas is Michael Gordon Shapiro. Hi, Michael. How are you?
I'm doing just splendidly, Nick. And as always, it's great to be back on the show.
We have both been to see the massively financially successful Beauty and the Beast, which has had a big rehash at the moment, hasn't it?
It has, bigger and allegedly better than ever.
And we obviously didn't sit together, but we saw it reasonably close, knitted to one another, if you know what I mean. We saw it, I did it again. We're actually coming up with a musical talk drinking game, aren't we, Mike?
Yes, I think I have to take a drink every time you make a statement with a rhetorical affirmative question at the end, don't I?
And you have coffee, so you should be okay.
Yes, I should be wide-eyed in a few moments.
Beauty and the Beast, the musical, has been, I don't want to say redone, but it sort of felt like that, didn't it?
It's been expanded and I would say elaborated upon with a lot of material that was not present or wasn't even implied in the original.
Before you went to see the film of Beauty and the Beast, the new one with Emma Watson and everyone else, you watched the, I don't want to say original because the original is a 1940s film, but the Disney original animated film from 1991. Seeing it again very recently, how did you feel that worked as a film compared to what you saw last night, which was the remake?
I was unexpectedly impressed from the original animated film. I went in with a sort of middling attitude and without a real memory of how strong that film was. When it comes to the Disney Renaissance musical movies, I've always been squarely in Team Mermaid and kind of felt meh about Beauty and the Beast. After revisiting it, I was unexpectedly moved, I was a little bit misty-eyed, and above all, I was really impressed by the tightness of the storytelling, the effortless flow of cause and effect, how one thing just led right into the other, and the pacing was great. By the way, this is foreshadowing for things we're going to talk about later about the new film. I re-understood why it's considered a classic, and that term was justified in my mind after I revisited it.
Did you see it when you were young?
Some of us are such an age that we didn't really have an opportunity to see it when we were young. I saw it in college, and in fact, I saw it at a press screening because as a writer for the college newspaper, I was nominally a member of the press. The film
almost like being in a podcast, isn't it, Michael?
Almost. Not as glorious, of course. The version I saw was actually missing some of the animation. There were a couple of penciled-in substitutes for things that weren't yet complete. So
nice.
That's how ahead of the curve I was. And I'm sure I saw it subsequently to then, but definitely not in the last 10 years.
And did you see the Broadway, well, back then it would have been the Los Angeles original production, wouldn't it?
I didn't, actually. I don't know what that experience is like.
So you skipped the making it into a real musical from the film to making it back into a film musical with what they should have put in the second film version, which was songs from the stage show, which is what a lot of critics are saying.
Oh, that's interesting. So there's material you're saying that was invented for Broadway that did not make its way back on the screen.
Yes, and there was stuff invented for the film that didn't make it into the original film that thus made it into Broadway that many argue should have made it into the remake of the film, not including when they released the animated on DVD, they put Human Again back into the film.
Right. Although I did recognize a few discarded verses from Gaston's song that I know had been cut. The Endless Refrains Like Gaston line, I know, was part of the very first film.
Yes.
And that somehow reemerged. I don't know if that was in the Broadway production or not, but there were some remnants.
Now, we were chatting about Howard Ashman only yesterday. Sorely missed, I think, and especially with this film. I think it shows, the new film.
Boy, does it ever. There's nothing like putting Tim Rice lyrics next to Howard Ashman lyrics to reignite your passion for Howard Ashman. There really was. He was a unique talent. Thank you. He was a unique talent, and he was just full of wit and cleverness and warmth, and there's just no substitute.
Though there was a very funny song from the Broadway show called Me, which is Tim Rice at his witty best. I think Tim Rice is a very witty lyricist. I disagree with you a bit there. But no one is as clever, I think, as Howard Ashman. You listen to some of those lyrics in their blind simplicity, but they're still incredibly clever. And he never wrote down for children, did he?
No, he encouraged children to rise up and perhaps grab a dictionary, and I don't think that's a bad thing.
We come to a point where Disney are now redoing all their Renaissance films to have a second Disney Renaissance. I will start with my thoughts with the film, and then we'll get to yours, which I believe might take a bit longer. I actually quite enjoyed it. I thought the visuals were stunning. I will start by saying that, and I don't think you can disagree with that, can you, Michael?
No, there were lovely expansions of the visuals of the original, which I think over time have looked a little bit dated, the animation from 1991, so that was definitely a step up.
I always enjoy hearing those songs, the original songs. I thought Emma Watson was okay. I don't know if it was intentional, but she underplayed the role, I will say politely, and everyone else kind of was a lot better than she. Ian McKellen was very, very funny. Dan Stevens as the Beast was very, very good indeed. Even Josh Gad as LeFou, we'll talk about him in a bit as well, was a different twist on the role, and he was very amusing. I think they've added some very funny lines into the film, mostly between Lumiere and Gaston. I missed the Maurice Chevalier kind of pastiche that Be Our Guest is meant to be, and it kind of turned into a more extremely lavish Busby Berkeley number, which the original was, but it also had insane psychedelic moments with the Bollywood moments. Do you remember that?
I do. I think this was a case of just because science allows us to do something doesn't mean that we should.
Which is the film summed up pretty well, I think. Which gets me on to Emma Watson's singing voice, and arguably other people's singing voices, I don't know. It's a shame, isn't it? I think the argument going around is, they should have dubbed her because, she obviously can't sing. But if we have the technology, why can't we use auto-tune? Because she sounded like Siri for most of the film, I would say. Michael, you're more of an expert in this world than I am, so do you want to... I hand the baton over to you?
That's kind.
Or the vocoder, even.
Nothing's great as a baton. Obviously, Paige O'Hara is a pretty high standard to aspire to, but I did not actually have a problem with Emma Watson's singing. Stylistically, it was more subdued. And yes, there were elements of autotune or Melodyne or whatever they were using to smooth out intonation. It didn't distract me. It was sufficient from my point of view, which contrasts to my point of view of her acting performance. But I know a lot of purists didn't like her performance, and this may tie over to the similar reaction we saw to some of the vocal performances in La La Land, that they all feel a little more contemporary. But no, I was fine with her singing.
The bit my ears didn't really gel with was Beauty and the Beast, the song, Tale as Old as Time, was a bit too big, I would think, in its orchestral timbre. To me, that song is always very high, lilting strings, woodwinds and piano, harp, and that's it, really. But here they had about 1,000 string sections and horns and God knows what else. It does seem a bit over the top, and I think a lot of the film was very over the top, and it was very, very padded out. I want to ask your views on the new things they've added, such as there's a twist at the end, which we won't reveal, but I didn't mind that, but even though I saw it happening from half an hour away. The bit I didn't really think was necessary was the whole Paris scene with the mother dying of the plague and things like that. What do you think?
Well, the new movie is clocking in at around 2 hours and 10 or 15 minutes, something along those lines.
I did tell you it was long, didn't I?
The original wasn't even 90 minutes. And I think the extra 40, 45 minutes that we got was spent answering questions that no one has ever asked and providing backstory that we don't really care about. And I agree that the imaginary/magical visitation of Belle's childhood in Paris feels like a bizarre non sequitur. There was no moment where I was watching the animated film where I thought, where's Belle from? You know, I mean, I don't buy that she's from this small village. She's got to have some kind of backstory.
With her British accent.
Yes, her strangely English village in the middle of France. I never said, why isn't there more mention of plague? That's not something that cropped up in my head when watching a children's movie. So I felt like all of the...
I kept wanting Quasimodo to appear in the Paris scene.
That's true. That would have been an amazing opportunity for a tie-in. Just a little Easter egg of having him amble by the camera.
Which is funny because in Hunchback of Notre Dame, we actually see Belle wander past. Very briefly, even though they are about 7 centuries apart. The question that is answered, which I did kind of like, even though they throw magic in as an excuse for it, is the Beast Castle is surrounded by snow. So we kind of have that Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe evil snow has fallen upon the castle where the village surrounding it is all spring and sunshine, which is quite a nice little touch. And that was never answered in the film. It was always snowy in the castle after being a warm summer's day.
Right. There are a couple of small details, and these are exceptions to the rule, where I did appreciate the elaboration, such as mentioning that the memory of the servants of the castle who were transformed into housewares and furniture was wiped out of the surrounding villages, so you don't have the family members and loved ones of the servants in the castle wondering what happened all of a sudden and why isn't Miss Potts coming home from her day gig working at the castle. So that was a nice little elaboration. One of the few that I appreciated. The other one being, I noted in the animated film, there's a moment where the beast has fought off the wolves and he plops down on the snow and he's unconscious. And the next shot, we dissolve immediately to Belle leading her horse back to the castle, and the beast is kind of fireman's draped over the horse. And I found myself asking, how did she get the beast on the horse? That guy's heavy. And yes, they addressed that burning question in the film. But aside from those details, I don't feel like the extra 40 minutes bought us anything really useful. There's kind of a weird digression where Maurice leads Gaston and LeFou to the castle to substantiate his claims that Belle has been kidnapped, but that mission is kind of abortive, and there's a little bit of a tussle between Gaston and Maurice, and repeating things that we know already, such as the fact that he wants to marry Belle, and I don't know why that entire episode was there. So there's a lot of filler, and I didn't appreciate it.
Now, the thing with this film is we all go in knowing 90% of the songs, the story, the end result, what the characters look like even. Do you think if we didn't have the 1991 film, you would have liked this film musical better if it was fresh?
I was wondering that myself. I asked self, could it be that you've just seen this entire movie 24 hours ago? Is that somehow sapping away your enjoyment of the new one? And I don't think so in my case. I remember watching the opening number in the new film and really enjoying it, and really being swept away and feeling that I was being re-ushered back into this story that I loved very much. So I approached it with a fresh heart and a willingness to fall in love with it for the second time in 48 hours. And I think ultimately what it boils down to for me, speaking personally, is that the characters have by and large been changed in a way that saps their efficacy as characters in this story, almost across the board. There are one or two characters I felt who were improved, but above all is the fact that the beast is no longer an angry beast. His edges have been smoothed. He's been made perhaps more sympathetic and more nuanced, as might befit a human actor. But he is no longer struggling against that rage, that anger that really predominated his personality in the animated film. He seems petulant. He seems a little condescending. It seems like they said, let's make him more like a former member of the nobility. Let's ask ourselves what people of that social class were like and what their attitudes were. And yes, they were educated and they were condescending and they're used to ordering around servants. And I think that was a mistake because he doesn't have the constant battle against his own internal rage and frustration that makes him such a compelling character in the animated film. And I would argue that that struggle for the beast to control his temper drives at least the second act, the romance sequence of the original film. And absent that, in the face of this prince who's now just kind of grumpy all the time, there isn't that same tension. There isn't that sense of, wow, the stakes are high here and how are these two ever going to fall in love? And I don't see it happening. And, oh, he has this little moment of remorse. That's great. You know, that whole experience from the first film is gone. And I felt that the romance felt very dull and easily anticipated. You kind of see where it's going. And since the two are not really at each other's throats, except at the very, very beginning, perhaps, there isn't any tension. There's no sense of stakes. It's just two people hanging out, and eventually they grow fond of each other.
Do you think the whole backstory of his father rejecting him and the mother and all that stuff was necessary?
I think the writers of this film were obsessed with backstory. There's a real art to implying backstory without swamping us in the details. And no, I didn't need to see any more of the prince's history than we saw in the opening of the animated film. He's a prince. I get it. He's a jerk. Okay. The old woman showed up, sent her off into the snow. All I need to know. Honestly, that's a pretty clear archetype, and any elaboration beyond that feels like self-indulgence on the part of the writers.
This is interesting talking to you because you've missed an entire chapter in the development of this musical. I know we get none of the musical theatre versions of songs, which is a shame, apart from a song called Home, which is played the first as underscoring when Belle sees her bedroom for the first time in a castle. But this is interesting that you've kind of done a curveball and missed what I think is a brilliant adaptation of the animated into enhancing it, which is what the film did also, arguably. What do you think of the songs?
There are two categories of songs. There's revisitations of the classic songs from the original. And it sounds like you're telling me that none of the songs from the Broadway reinterpretation made it into the film. Is that right?
Correct.
So we're dealing with the old songs and then some new material that has been interpolated and added to accompany the 40 minutes of new material. I really loved the opening number. I thought that was a great cinematic treatment of something that was a little more understated in original form. I think they captured the rhythm and the flow of the animation and the all hands on deck number qualities of that song.
Did you like Audrey McDonald's appearance? Or Wardrobe McDonald, as I call it.
Wardrobe McDonald, yeah. I didn't object. I don't know how necessary her character was, but she has a lovely voice. I didn't really have much else. Was she given the title song? Or was that still Mrs. Potts? It's
still Mrs. Potts, but she sings a tiny reprise of it at the end, which I did quite like, which is some of Howard's lovely lyrics, which they found.
I didn't have a problem with her. I really liked the mob song. That was another case where I felt that the spirit of the original was recaptured, but enriched with a bigger ensemble and even more energy. And that was when I kind of perked up again after having halfway fallen asleep through the second act. I thought those were two really high points. I'm inclined to agree with your sentiments about the title song. Also, the tempo of Be Our Guest was a little too sluggish, and perhaps the number was a little too protracted, but it wasn't offensive or anything. I was disappointed in Gaston's song, but not because of the music per se or its treatment, but in that how it reflected how Gaston had been transformed as a character. And I think next to the declawed beast, see what I did there, Gaston's transformation into a older and more petulant kind of character, I thought was the second big unfortunate change that the film brought about. What did you think about this imagining of Gaston?
Well, he has a backstory as well, doesn't he?
Everybody has a backstory.
He's the captain from the war. We don't know which war, but a war. It's never explained why he's such a douche. I would want something to have happened to him in the war if they're going to go crazy and have backstories. In the original 1991 animation, he's just a douche. You know, like the prince is just a douche. Just a douche. It sounds like a French dessert. The bit I didn't like in the Gaston song was the dance arrangement, where the waltz disappears entirely and it kind of goes into this weird stomp-esque...
kind of a Russian folk dance moment.
Yeah, but the star of that song is the lyrics, and I'm glad that they've added more of Howard's lyrics. As I said, it's got one of my favourite lyrics of all time in it, which is, as a specimen, yes, I'm intimidating.
Note that Gaston as a specimen in this movie is actually not intimidating at all.
No.
He's not the muscle-bound, vainglorious goon that he was in the first movie.
And this brings me to my whole issue of the film, which I've thought about over the last couple of days. The reason I like the animated version more is that the whole story lends itself, the way Disney did it with the enchanted objects and Gaston being larger than life, it lends itself better to animation, because you can draw these caricatures, and I didn't like the enchanted objects. Wardrobe McDonald looked creepy, looked like something out of a Goosebumps story. Mrs. Potts, her mouth is meant to be the funnel of the teapot, and it's just like a teapot with a little face on it, and it just looks like something a child drew. And I know they're going for realism, but it's not real.
I'm inclined to agree. I thought Lumiere was visually a little bit off-putting. He was stuck in between looking like an animated character and looking like a photorealistic character. You know, if you think of the classic the principles of Disney animation, one of them was appeal. So yeah, I'm totally on board with you there. The household help in their transformed forms are a little bit disturbing to look at. They're stuck in, I think, the furniture equivalent of the uncanny valley.
I want to know what it was like for Alan Menken, because I don't think this has ever happened, and it will happen a lot now in his career if he continues to do all these. Has anyone ever rescored one of their films? Not only songs, but rescored the complete incidental score.
We don't call it incidental score. We call it underscore. But yes, I thought the new score was great. And I'll go on a little bit of a soapbox here for a moment and say that I think Alan Menken is underappreciated as a film composer proper, a writer of instrumental score to his own movies. I think if you listen to Tangled, I think the score for that is gorgeous.
Well, he's not underappreciated by the Academy, you can say that.
Well, ironically, I think he won a lot of Academy Awards for song scores, but thanks to Academy members who were voting for him because they remembered the songs. So maybe his scoring prowess was accidentally acknowledged and unintentionally acknowledged.
But he still won best score and then best song for often the same film.
It is an oddity. So I think ironically people don't appreciate his scoring, which is actually very, very good. Dating back to Little Mermaid, I think he has a real talent for underscore.
Which was the first film he ever scored.
It was a very impressive debut. If you look at the scene where, I forget if it's Flounder or Ariel, but they're swimming away from a shark underwater, and there's a lot of sudden musical hits. It's very elegantly done. It was done in a time where computer tools were not as sophisticated as they are to help you with the timing. So I've always admired that aspect of his work, and I think here he did a fine job of elaborating songs or the material between songs, and the score passages were sometimes expanded or written from whole cloth. And I was, to the extent that I was not being bored by the main performances of the film, I really liked what he did there.
What about the new songs?
The new songs. My opinion is that they were unnecessary. They didn't move the story forward in the way that the classic songs all did. And I think this is a real virtue of the original film, is that recently we've been talking about some of the differences between movie musicals and stage musicals. And one of the qualities of a good stage musical is that the songs are enjoyable as music, but also serve a vital role in the progression of the story or the plot. They give us some information that we need, or some character takes an action in the middle of a song or makes a decision. There's some reason we need that song to be there, and if we remove it, the show falls apart.
Like if Beauty and the Beast opened without Belle, the song, we'd be a bit amiss as to who she was and who Gaston was. So that's why the opening number is so, dare I say, perfect?
You dare. I think you dare. It is a really great opening tune. And I think it's characteristic of the music of the original film, where every single number serves a purpose. Even the Gaston song, which you think, oh, here's just a bit of goofy comic business that's just essentially reintroducing a character who's been introduced to us. Well, the second half of the Gaston song, after the interlude where Maurice stumbles into the tavern and says, rescue my daughter, is actually very important to the story. They re-enter
and then gets cut in the new film.
It does. Does it? Wait, does it?
Yes, it wasn't there.
The reprise. No, because it's the moment where he says that's Belle's father and her sanity is only so-so. That moment is still in the film, right?
Nope, they completely cut that. They completely change how that whole moment happens.
Well, I mean, I know the consequences of that moment change. Well, in any case, in the movie, Every song does something important. You might argue that Be Our Guest is sort of on the threshold of being just a dance number, though I would argue from the standpoint of
no, but it shows that the staff are welcoming Belle as opposed to the Beast who isn't.
Exactly. I think it's important in the sense that it gives Belle her first reason to not want to escape. So I will accept that. And every other song in the original is just you absolutely need it. It's part of the story. You cannot remove it. So if you turn to the new material, there's, I guess, a diegetic tune at the very beginning of
Take a shot.
Movie. There you go. I was saying diegetic before it was cool. You have a in-movie song sung at the court of the pre-Beast prince. That's neither here nor there. That's just a little moment of ambience, and that's not objectionable. But every other song just kind of feels pasted in. They thought, we really should have another song here. Let's write a song that's a little bit like something new in that it's supposed to show the transition of time, but we already have something new coming in the next scene, so this will be
I believe you mean something
preliminary.
there.
Something there, sorry, something there. Something there is the classic montage song where you see two characters by degrees warming up to each other and falling in love. So that's a really important song. And in the new song, which I believe is called Days in the Sun, it's almost the same thing before it happens, and it doesn't really accomplish anything.
The criticism of the film is that the Beast had no song. Then in the stage show, he closed Act 1 with a beautiful song, What If I Can't Love Her? And then Alan described the song Evermore as the kind of cousin to If I Can't Love Her. Happens a bit later on in the new film, as the song did in the stage show where it ended Act 1, which is the Beast's big song in the current film musical. I think it almost works, but if you know If I Can't Love Her, and you're kind of in a better place than I am for this, Michael, because my guess is you don't if you haven't seen the stage show, it's not as good a song, and it's a real shame. You just think, just put If I Can't Love Her in, it's a beautiful song.
What's happening in the stage musical when the Beast has his song? What's the context?
In the new film, he lets Belle go, doesn't he? He says, go.
He does, that's the juncture.
Yeah, go back to Maurice and save him. Whereas in Beauty and the Beast on stage, If I Can't Love Her happens before something there. It's after Be Our Guest, and I think it's just the Beast kind of feeling sorry for himself, saying, if I can't, because the kind of hook in the song is, if I can't love her, then who? It should be whom, but never mind. If I can't love her, then who? And he's torn because this is his one chance, and if he blows it, that's it. But he's hideous, and he looks like this Beast, and he's feeling, it's a kind of emo, feeling down for myself, teenage boy moment.
Well, at least it sounds like that song is heightening a conflict, which is a useful thing for a song to do. It reminds us of stakes. Here are the consequences. If I fail to fall in love with someone, gosh, I'm in a real pickle, aren't I? That's a good function for a song. That keeps us engaged because it's highlighting tension. In this new song, Evermore, he has just let Belle go. Sorry, spoiler alert. He's let Belle go, and he is loudly bemoaning the fact to us. And he is telling us things that we already know, which is an amateurish mistake for a theater composer. It's something that Howard Ashman would have never have done. He would have never had a song where a character experienced something and then turned to the camera and recapped the thing that he just experienced and told us the emotions he had already put on display. I think that's a rookie mistake. And so the whole song is boring. We know you're upset, Beast. We get it. We followed what just happened. Any song that ever here's a tip for the listeners out there. If a song begins with the phrase like in my life or all my life, you know it's bad. Because either we saw what is about to be enshrined in song, or else we didn't see it and it's something from when they were 5, and who cares? What we're really concerned with is not so much what just happened, unless there's some kind of new spin on what just happened. If there's some consequence, if the Beast said, surprise, there's actually 4 other beasts in my cellar and we all have to find brides, or there was some new information that was being given to us, that's great.
Don't give them any ideas.
That's true. They need some new sequels. The Beast family. So yeah, that was a problem. It was redundant.
It's a nice song, though.
Yeah, musically, I actually enjoyed it. No problem with Alan's work.
I don't think we can possibly even blame Tim Rice for it. My guess is a lot of it's down to Bill Condon and the scriptwriters, because we didn't have a figure like Howard around to drive the development of the story and thus the lyrics and thus Alan's musical choices. I'm making a very, very big assumption here, but I don't think Alan was probably as involved as he was with the original.
The impression I get from interviews with him, and I'm sure you're better educated than I am in this respect, is that he is following orders more often than not. He's being given a task and he does it as a very skilled craftsman. I don't fault him for any of the songs, which are often musically enjoyable. Tim Rice's lyrics do not stand up to the level of Howard Ashman's. And I don't mean this in the sense that if you bring in a PhD and have them do some exegesis and analysis and some syllable count and uses of vocabulary, that there's some kind of abstract way to say one is better than the other. I mean that just, even to a casual listener, Tim Rice's lyrics tend to be full of very obvious rhymes and blurry, vague imagery, and there's none of the wit and specificity that really characterizes Howard Ashman's, at least not in this movie, not in the lyrics that he provided for this film. And I thought the Evermore lyrics were so generic, so predictable. It sounded like...
Does he rhyme tower with hour by any chance?
That does strike a bell. And I know the word open door was used as a rhyme term, so that's never good.
Strikes a bell. See what we did there. There's a lovely soundtrack, and what I loved about the soundtrack immediately from pressing play was there was an overture. Were you treated to that in your screening?
You mean a proper overture, as in
yes.
before... Oh, no, there wasn't. I didn't know that.
Okay, so I went to a rather special version of the film where we had an orchestra. I say orchestra, it was a string section with a harp and a pianist and some backing singers, interspersed with Q&As from Alan and the rest of the cast and the crew, which is very nice, talking about the songs, and we got performances of the songs. The orchestra players left the stage, and then the whole stage in the cinema lowered, and the orchestra disappeared, which was very nice. A bit of magic there. And this was at the Odeon in Leicester Square. And then a big thing came up on the screen saying overture. And we had the full 3-minute overture for the film playing. And I do urge you to listen to that, Mike, because it really is very, very skillfully done. It's not as interesting as it could be. I would have liked some dissonance in it. And it's very kind of, minor third key change. Must be an overture moment. But it had a real nice old-fashioned feel to it.
Is it a classical overture in the sense of being a medley of the songs that you're going to hear?
Yes, absolutely. Even featuring some of the new songs, which is nice. A 95-piece orchestra, of course. Do you think that's too big for a musical film?
I appreciated the richer sound of the ensemble in as much as I noticed it. I think I most noticed it in, as I said, the opening tune and the mob song, which are both numbers that really call for a almost symphonic sound, a really grandiose.
Whereas Gaston, which I like the fact they put this in, is diegetic, isn't it? Because there was a little band playing in the tavern.
It's nominally diegetic, but when I think of diegetic music, I think of something that has no narrative function. It's just something that you would hear in the world of the story if you were just a casual passerby walking by a tavern. So there is a blurry boundary sometimes where there will be a song in a musical or a film, and there will be some on-screen musician nominally producing that. But I would call Gaston more of a proper book song than diegetic. One thing the film added was an elaboration of the peril faced by the household staff. How did you react to that?
Are you referring to the moment, which I found to be quite moving, when they almost became locked in their inanimate state towards the end?
Well, that whole thread where there are many more discussions among the staff as to their fate. How did you feel about that whole elaboration across the film?
Well, that came actually from the Broadway show, so that was nice that they put that whole thing in. And I did feel quite moved when there's a scene when they're all standing outside, I believe, and they do suddenly seize up and become inanimate objects. And that worked for me. I felt quite moved because you do love these characters. What I didn't think was successful was the action sequence where they attack quite violently these villagers that then they're suddenly very friendly with once the objects return back to their human form. I always feel action scenes go on a bit too long in the film, and it wasn't really funny, it was just violent. And I said to you, because we were chatting before you went to see the film, this isn't a kid's film.
Indeed. And do you remember the musical underscoring of that same scene in the original film?
It was Be Our Guest.
It was an instrumental reprise of Be Our Guest.
Which I thought would be brilliant if they reprised it, because then it would be even cleverer.
It's clever.
An ironic version of Be Our Guest.
Well, I think you've
Let me
touched
burn
upon
you on your chest, you know.
Oh, you mean it would be fun to have an actual song at that point?
A kind of minor, creepy version.
Kind of a snarky version, yeah. The message there is a little more subtle than if they had explicitly had the furniture singing that as a battle chant. But I do think that by reprising it, it's not only clever, but it added a little bit of levity and almost slapstick quality to that moment. And I think that would have addressed, I'm going backwards chronologically, but I think the complaints you are raising were addressed in the original film because of the can-can-esque underscore, which made that moment a little lighter and a little more frivolous.
And also because it's a cartoon as well. This is going back to my original thing of it's too real. In a cartoon, it's like Tom and Jerry. If you saw a film of a cat being smashed over the head with an anvil, it's more disturbing in real life than it is in an animation.
This is why I felt alienated by Book of Mormon as opposed to South Park. It's because if someone gets shot in the head in front of you, it's just not cool if they're a real person. Whereas in South Park, if someone's shot in the head, it's usually pretty funny. So I think the same complaint can be made here with living, breathing people being crushed to death under a falling wardrobe. It's not quite the laugh out loud moment as it is when it happens in a cartoon.
The big elephant in the room is the so-called gay moment, which I actually missed when I saw the film because I blinked. Apparently, LeFou is dancing with the man who ends up being dressed as a woman, and that caused it to be banned in Malaysia. And all. What do you think of all this nonsense, Mike?
I think it's overblown. I think it's ridiculous. I think having LeFou as a gay character is just a little inflection to his comic persona. It adds a really funny tension when he's telling, I guess he's lightly dissuading Gaston from being interested in women, and Belle in particular, because, he has his own designs. I thought that was funny. I don't think there's anything offensive about that at all. And in fact, I almost wonder if it was Disney marketing at work trying to stir up some controversy. The sort of person who's going to take umbrage with LeFou being gay, it seems they'd be much more offended by the conspicuously multiracial staff of the prince's household help. If anything, that felt much more like virtuous signaling to me on Disney's part than LeFou. So I think it's a fake controversy. I think LeFou's characterization was actually one of the high points of the film for me. I thought Josh Gad did a great job of giving him a little more comic punch and personality and making him a little less broad and slapstick than the cartoon version.
I didn't mind LeFou at all. I think it was very charming. He was very, dare I say, cute. And he just, like in the animation, because he gets beaten up so much, he obviously didn't do that. He added a nice comic level to it that I just don't think it needed to be pointed out by the director, said, oh, he's a gay character.
Another character who I felt was an improvement over the original was Kevin Kline as Maurice the father. And I think this was a case where the meddling actually worked favorably for the character. I thought he had a kind of dignity. He was a little bit above the doddering old codger slapstick archetype that is in so many Disney films. He had depth and kind of compassion and humanity, and I actually enjoyed the scenes between Maurice and Belle. The scene at the beginning where it shows their bond tinkering with Maurice's inventions, I guess he's not as much of a crazy inventor, but there's still that moment where he's like scalpel, that kind of doctor assistant dynamic,
which made a nice return later on in the film at a moment of peril, which I thought was quite sweet.
It did. I liked, leaving aside the fact that it was useful from a plot perspective, as you say, I very much liked the father-daughter moment surrounding that scene as well towards the end. So Kevin Kline was a big plus in terms of the character transformations, in my opinion.
You said yesterday on a very subtle Facebook post, Beauty and the Disappointment. Now you've slept on your thoughts and woken up and discussed them for 47 minutes with me, are you still annoyed, or are you slightly thinking, oh, I actually didn't mind that bit? What are your thoughts?
I find my opinion has been rebolstered by the passage of 24 hours and some sleep and some contemplation. I just thought that it was too long, a little bit too turgid, and that the transformation of the characters was almost never to the film's benefit. I think that the Beast lacks an intensity and passion that drove the first film, and the romance feels very fatalistically predictable. So overall, I appreciated certain moments very much. As I said, I loved the opening, loved the mob song, but mostly what it did right, in my opinion, was recapture certain moments of the original film or breathe a little bit more energy into them. But by and large, I can't see this as being a classic in the same sense that the original was. What's your take?
I liked it. I mean, I will say that. I will be very honest, but I was highly attentive throughout the whole of the... It did seem long, I will say that, and I have said that. I thought there were some nice changes. I thought the new songs were okay, but I missed the Broadway songs. I think it needed a big comedy song. I know we have Be Our Guest and Gaston, but there's a song you should listen to called Human Again, which was originally written for the film, 9 minutes long, didn't go in, put it into the stage show, works really well. Put it back into the animated, still works really well. Should have been put into this version, at least as a homage to Howard. But I think we've run out of time, Michael. I'm looking out the window, and spring is on its way. This is going to be very cheesy. I'm going to have my lunch, and we're finished. So I am going to end with a lyric which I did like, a lost lyric of Howard Ashman. Winter turns to spring, famine turns to feast, nature points the way, nothing left to say, Beauty and the Beast. So, Michael, thank you very much for sharing your thoughts. Do go and listen to the Broadway cast recording, please.
I absolutely will. You've piqued my curiosity.
In case you haven't had enough of these songs.
Why stop now?
Yeah, exactly. Might as well. And then the Australian version and the London version. But, Michael, thank you very, very much for discussing the film. And if you have any thoughts on the film, listener, we are on Twitter at Musical Talk and Facebook and Instagram and all that jazz. And I'm sure this will be a film we'll visit again because... like La La Land, there's so much more to say.
Indeed. Well, it was a pleasure, as always.
Thank you very much, Michael. Still here with a very excited Antonia. So when Michael and I finished that interview, we had a slight chat about it off-air, about whether the film is taking advantage of the fact that the people that, like you and I, who saw the film originally when we were young, if they're making, not light of the fact, but if they are taking advantage, cynically, of the fact that we... are now the grown-up generation and we would pay to see the film again. Is it purely a nostalgic exercise, or does this film actually have a purpose beyond that?
I think that's the thing. I think if you're a Hollywood producer or a movie producer now, you kind of have to... I think that there's not a lot of risk-taking, and I don't think there's any risk involved with a film like this, so it's kind of...
Well, it has made its $170 million
exactly.
back already.
So they knew this was going to be a big hit. No matter who's in it, you know, whether the singing is good or not, none of that matters. They knew that this film would sell itself.
Are you saying I could have played Gaston and it still would have been a hit?
No, maybe not, but
you
know
could have played
Belle.
Belle.
I could have played Belle. No.
Every day.
Yeah, they knew this film was going to sell. So from that's why they've done it. But at the same time, there's enough in there to interest people that are completely new to the film, and they know that as adults, if we have children, we will bring children to see this film. Or they have to admit, at my screening, which was an 8 o'clock on a Monday night screening, so a school night, there was adults, but it wasn't packed. There was like, the audience was like half full. So, you know, it was people our age that were interested in the...
Whereas the 2,000 people screening I went to, as far as I can see, there were no kids at all, but that was an 8:30 screening. Had I gone to the Saturday morning one, there might have been more screaming kids, and thank heaven I didn't.
Yeah, and I teach a lot of children, and since the film came out till now, I've all the children I teach have been to see it, and have gone, oh my god, this is an amazing film.
But that's the Disney marketing genius, isn't it? Tonia's phone is now ready, so she's going to be distracted for the whole of this little chat. It's quite scary, isn't it? The wolves, for example, the
mob scene's quite threatening.
The mob scene, but also, as I said with Michael, the scene where they attack where the animated objects attack the mob is also quite violent because, as I said, it's not a cartoon.
There's not the Be Our Guests coming back in the background to make you feel as an audience member that it's all a bit of fun. There's none of that. It's much more threatening.
Now, you're actually a little fairy tale expert, aren't you? So
I wouldn't say that, but I'm more... I love the old fairy tales, and I'm currently rereading the Brothers Grimm stories as well.
How depressing for you. Yes, let's chop her toes off because her feet won't fit in the slippers, and then
that's
the
not
birds...
Cinderella, though.
It
is Cinderella, but that's not the character of Cinderella.
No.
That's not what they do to her. That's the ugly sister that does that.
Let's have some birds peck the eyes out and things.
Yeah.
This isn't a Grimm fairy tale,
No.
So there are nods to the original fairy tale, for example, that we didn't have in the original cartoon. The picking of the white rose, for example.
So that is in the original fairy tale.
Fairy tale.
So that is in the original fairy tale.
Fairy tale, now appearing at the drag club.
Yeah, that is in the original fairy tale.
you and I both agree that the scene in Paris was a bit unnecessary. Was
Yeah.
the mother dying of the plague in the original fairy tale, do we think?
It's been such a long time since I've read that, so I actually can't remember. Someone will probably write and tell me I'm wrong, but I think that's something they made up for the film. Out of all the changes for the film, it's probably the only one I felt wasn't necessary, but the rest of them
You didn't mind?
I didn't mind. Yeah, the rest of them I didn't mind.
You didn't think the songs were completely
No,
necessary?
that was my problem with it, and that's
Cut
why
all the songs.
that's why I agree with you and Michael. I made the mistake of listening to the soundtrack before I went to the film, and I was texting you going, "Oh my god, they've changed so many things. This is awful. Where's the cadenza and I guess gone? Ah!" And you were like, "Just wait."
Coloratura.
The coloratura cadenza, yeah. And I was like, basically panicking, and you were like, "Just calm down and see the film. It's fine." And since then, actually, the music doesn't bother me. As far as the changes that they've made to the original score. But I do agree with you, Michael, that the songs are incredibly weak, the new songs that have been written. I don't mind Days in the Sun. I think that's okay, although I do feel as though they could have taken Human Again from the Broadway show and put that in, and it would have been a bit more upbeat, because something I did feel is there's far too many ballads.
Yes. It did need another new upbeat song. Alan's excuse, well, Human Again is a 9-minute number and it's never
They could
really
have cut it down.
it's never really worked in any position it goes in and things, and because Cogsworth and Lumiere, they're such a fun little comedy trio, to have a somber moment, it didn't really work very nicely with the film.
That was the one I hated.
Yeah.
And I did use the word hate. I think it's the only few minutes of the film I just thought, this is completely unnecessary.
Did you hate it from a performance point of view, or from
No,
a...
I didn't think it was badly sung. I just can't imagine the Beast singing that.
No. Can you imagine singing If I Can't Love Her?
Not at that particular point in the film, but
But it's the same song. It's the same big note here, ending standing on the turret of a castle.
to be honest, I don't feel like the Beast needed a song. I didn't think that song was necessary, but what bothered me about the song, I've been humming some of the new tunes to you today and going, actually, maybe endlessly, maybe these have been going in my head. I don't mind the actual music of that. It's the lyrics that I think are incredibly poor. We just don't think we need that moment there. The pain in the cartoon of Belle leaving is expressed in a single roar by the Beast. We don't need an entire 4-minute song. During that moment, I did actually switch off a little bit. But I did say to you, it reminded me a bit of what's it? Out There from The Hunchback of Notre Dame. Very similar in orchestral, style, timbre, and also the fact that he's on right on the top of the castle.
I thought he was going to jump and kill himself. I said to Andrew, "Don't jump, Beast."
I thought there was so many nice.
He still doesn't have a
changes.
name, by the way.
Oh yeah, that's
Still
the point.
Beast.
They never addressed that. That would have something they could have addressed, actually.
It's like when they called the Phantom Eric
Yeah.
in Phantom of the Opera.
Yeah, Eric. Yeah.
I think.
Yeah, he's Eric. I think one thing I particularly liked was Belle's character. I actually, because if we link back to the discussion, one of the first discussions we had on Musical Talk together about female characters fitting into musical theatre and fairy tales, and changing characters so much that they don't fit into the kind of fairy tale genre anymore can be a bit problematic. But I really liked the change that they did to Belle's character.
There's been a change in me.
I thought they took all the kind of Belle's essence from the original and developed on it. I didn't mind Emma Watson. I don't know what people say. I think some of it's down to the fact that people my age are just incredibly jealous that she's living out their reality they want to live. They want to be Belle.
But you're a singer.
Yeah.
What do you think of her vocal performance?
It's difficult because when I listened to the soundtrack, I said to you, it is so auto-tuned. I do feel there is a voice there.
Did that bother you?
The autotune bothers me, and you know that I said that whoever did the autotune should be sacked because it's so obvious. But I can hear a voice in there, and I think she can sing. It's just the way it's been done isn't the best. But to be honest, after a few minutes of watching the film, I completely forgot about that and was just carried away in the experience of it, and it didn't bother me in the film.
It's probably good she doesn't have a big song. And
in what she did was fine.
She has her Sound of Music moment, which was beautifully
Adequate.
done.
Yep, fine.
And the thing is, everyone else overshadows her in their vocal performance, and I think that's the point of the role anyway.
Yeah, it was subtle, but what I felt disappointed in was that they didn't take the opportunity to put some of the songs from the Broadway and the stage musical version into the film. But I think that's maybe down to the casting of the I said to you, I really liked Gaston. I thought he had a really great voice, but whether he could quite carry off Me from the original stage.
You wish.
I wish. The song Me from the original stage show, or like I say, Emma singing Home or Changing Me. I don't know. That could be the reason why they're not in there.
Damn if they do, damn if they don't. So
Yeah.
I think if they did do it, they'd just get accused of being lazy for songwriting. It wouldn't be nominated for any Oscars. Not that Alan needs any more Oscars. And it just would seem as though they just, I've seen the songs already, and they can't really market the fact it's got 3 new songs in. And
Yeah.
I'm sure it was entirely a kind of business decision. I'm sure it crossed their minds many times.
Yeah, and I said to you...
It must have been really hard for Alan and Tim to come up with new songs, not for the same point, but Evermore is practically saying the same thing as If I Can't Love Her. It just happens a bit later on.
Yeah.
It must have been really hard to come up with another song that they know we already have one that works.
Well, I think what this film has in its favour is the fact that they have actually tried to do new things with it. They could have just done exactly the same as the cartoon with no changes, with no... Cause it's like, they've been a bit adventurous with it, and I think it has paid off, and I think that if they hadn't done that, like you say, they would have been criticised. So you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't, and like you say, it did need some new songs in it. I think I would have liked to have seen a mix of new songs and Broadway songs in it, and I think that would have been a way to kind of, get more people interested in it. Because I know a lot of musical theatre and Disney fans who are not keen on seeing the film because they think it's going to be changed too much.
You were keen on seeing it, you were just apprehensive, but you still enjoyed it.
I think listeners of Musical Talk will know I've been going, oh my God, for months. But I was a little bit apprehensive, like I said, when I heard the soundtrack. I was like, oh my God, what have they done? But then I saw the film and I was completely blown away. So,
and what annoys me is the best bit of the soundtrack for me, which is the overture, not in the film.
No.
It was in the screening I went to, as I said, and it had
it wasn't mine.
the word overture written on it, but that's a nice thing, and I wish they would have kept it. You agree with many people when you would say The Beast doesn't work.
Yeah, that was another point I agree with you and Michael on. I didn't think he was angry enough. I thought he was very Louis XIV, and they've kind of likened him to a Mr. Darcy in the interviews I've heard, from what I can kind of gather, they've tried to create him less beast-like and more human trapped in a beast's body. And for me, it doesn't work. I think what was great in the original cartoon is that he took on some of the characteristics of the beast, of being a beast, because he was so frustrated and angry and, all those things. It just doesn't work because the change was very subtle in the remaked version, instead of being very obvious as it is in the cartoon. And I think that's where the cartoon just has a slightly better strength, is in the Beast character. What I did like was that you got to see the Beast backstory. You do see it in the cartoon. You see the stained glass window animation of the story of how he got turned into a beast, but you actually got an idea of his kind of attitude and
the relationships he had with the staff and the villagers as well.
Yeah, exactly. And what I mean by very Louis XIV is... he was very flamboyant and controlling, and he kind of got that element of flamboyancy and controlling in the beginning of the film. It was very, very similar. So I can see some sort of parallels there.
I think now I would have liked to have seen more of his backstory as the story went on, if he would have flashbacks or something.
Well, that could have worked. There was one in Days of the Sun where he says goodbye to his mother and then he's taken away, isn't he?
But I wanted to see more of his relationship he had with his father, and if they're going to add these backstories, make more use of them, because they're just really random at some points, like the Paris one.
Yeah. I didn't mind, but I did think it was 100% necessary to the story. But some of the other ones I didn't mind. I didn't mind the changes that they did to Gaston and LeFou's storyline. I liked the little things they added to Maurice. I thought Maurice was such a better character because something that we discussed in the episode that we talked about feminism and fairy tales and Disney films and stuff was stereotypes. And obviously there's the stereotype of the typical girly princess, and there's the stereotype of the prince. There's always the there's a stepmother who's a bitch,
evil.
And there's always the dad who's a little bit doddery or whatever. And I thought they fleshed out his character. He was really gentle, and you could sympathise with him. He was much more down to earth, and I really just liked the change in image of his character. He was more fatherly rather than the cartoon version, which is
grandfatherly or avuncular.
Yeah, rather than the other. Yeah, I preferred that change. I thought that was, and I thought the performance was very nice. I thought most of the performance was really good, and I didn't think Emma's was weak compared to vocally, maybe slightly compared to other people, but I didn't mind her acting choices. I thought she was. I thought she brought some more down to earth character to Belle, and she was. What I liked about it is it proves to people that you can be girly, but you can also run around and get messy if you want to, and you can read, and you can be interested in pretty dresses and reading and everything. So you don't have to be one or the other.
But would you say that's what Emma's portrayed most of her life?
I guess so, but I mean, I think that. I listened to interview with the director of the film on Front Row, and he said that the changes he made to the character were inspired by Emma, but Emma didn't push for them. But I think through acting choices it was obvious that she wanted a more nuanced character through Belle to life, rather than okay, we're just going to do the fairy tale stereotype thing. Something we talked about in a fairy tale episode is whether that works in a fairy tale context, and I thought that they got the balance right of this being a fairy tale word, but also having realistic characters in it.
Well, thank you very much for sharing your thoughts on Beauty and the Beast. I'm glad you liked it. I would probably go again if you want to see it again.
I really want to see it again. I literally have not stopped talking about it since Monday. I really liked it.
Let's talk briefly about episodes we have in the works, because I think it's got some quite fun things.
Well, talking about stereotypes, we are going to do an episode, I think it's quite exciting, on villains. Villains and the stereotype of the villain, and whether the villain is a straightforward villain, or whether it's a little bit more unclear about whether they're actually the villain of the piece or not. I think that's going to be quite an interesting conversation. And what makes a good musical theatre villain, I think, is quite an interesting discussion. We're also going to talk about kind of iconic women of musical theatre. So
yes, not so much the performance side, because there are so many obvious choices, but more the writing side, the creative side. We have asked on social media, but if you have any creative types of the female persuasion, let us know, and we'll do our best to talk about them or talk to them.
Do you have a favourite?
I think Susan Stroman is incredibly talented. Janine Tesori is a wonderfully talented composer.
There are so many more than we realised, because when we were talking about our, again, Women in Musical Theatre episode, we were a bit stuck on creatives and performers, and that's why we were a bit stuck on finding creatives and composers and lyricists that were women, because they are there, it's just whether they're actually at the forefront of musical theatre or not. The one that was suggested to us on Twitter, Helen Cart, I hadn't even thought to even think of. Yeah, it is obvious when you think about it, but these people just get forgotten. So this is what the episode's going to be about.
What other episodes?
We might do one on vocal styles. An opera, maybe, if I can twist Nick's arm to get him to let me do the one on...
He's punched it enough, so...
Well, the origins of opera and where musical theatre come from, yeah.
Right, time to call it a day, but thank you very much to you, Tonya, and to Michael, and this has been a production of Musical Talk, copyright 2017. Thos will be with you next week, so enjoy that, of another episode of Musical Talk. I will speak to you in a few weeks.
Bye-bye. Do you want to do that last bit again, because I talked over you?